Captain Michael Chen had been flying commercial aircraft for 23 years, and he'd never heard the sound that filled the cockpit of Flight 482 at 3:47 p.m. on that Tuesday afternoon. It was a grinding metallic screech, followed by 3 sharp bangs that reverberated through the entire fuselage of the Boeing 737, making the control yoke shudder in his hands. "What the hell was that?" First Officer Jamie Rodriguez's voice was tight, controlled, but Michael heard the edge of panic underneath. Michael's eyes scanned the instrument panel. They were 37,000 feet over central Pennsylvania, halfway through the routine flight from Boston to Chicago. 147 souls on board, passengers and crew, all trusting that the 2 men in this cockpit knew what they were doing. The warning lights came on all at once. Engine number 2, failure. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Fire warning in the right engine. The cacophony of alarms was deafening. "Engine fire right side," Jamie called out, already reaching for the fire suppression system. "Shutting down engine 2. Michael's training took over, 23 years of muscle memory and procedure. "Fire checklist. I have the aircraft." But even as he spoke, he felt it. The plane was wrong. Not just one engine out, which any commercial pilot trained for constantly. This was different. The controls felt mushy, unresponsive. The hydraulic pressure gauges were falling fast, all 3 systems showing red. "Mike, we're losing hydraulics," Jamie said, his voice climbing. "All 3 systems. That's not possible from just an engine failure." Michael knew what his first officer was thinking, because he was thinking it too. Losing all hydraulic systems meant losing the ability to control the aircraft. No way to move the flaps, the rudder, the ailerons, everything that kept a plane flying straight and level. It was the nightmare scenario, the one you trained for but prayed you'd never face. United Flight 232 in Sioux City, 1989. Total hydraulic failure. They'd managed to land using only engine thrust for control, but 111 people had died. The odds of surviving this were not good. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. Cleveland Center, this is United 482 Heavy. We have dual engine failure and complete hydraulic loss, requesting immediate vectors to nearest suitable airport." Michael's voice was steady, professional, but his heart was hammering. The controller's response came quickly, stress evident even through the radio static. "United 482, Cleveland Center copies your mayday. Closest airport is Pittsburgh International, bearing 270, distance 80 nautical miles. Descend and maintain 10,000 feet. 80 miles. Might as well be 800 with no hydraulics." Michael tried the controls again, gently pressuring the yoke. Barely any response. The plane was starting to porpoise. Nose up, then down, then up again, as the flight control computers tried and failed to compensate for the hydraulic loss. Behind him, through the reinforced cockpit door, he could hear the flight attendants' voices rising as they tried to calm passengers who'd heard the explosion and felt the violent shudder. Michael thought about his wife Sarah, his daughters Emma and Sophie, ages 16 and 14. Would this be the last day they had a father? "Talk to me, Jamie. What are our options?" Michael kept his voice level, forcing calm into the cockpit even as the altitude indicator showed them starting an uncontrolled descent. Jamie's fingers flew over the controls, trying different combinations, looking for any system that still responded. "Engine 1 is still good, running at max thrust. But without hydraulics we can't control direction. I'm trying differential thrust, but it's barely responsive. Mike, I don't think we can make Pittsburgh." Michael's mind raced through possibilities, scenarios, training exercises from decades of flying. The plane was descending at roughly 2,000 feet per minute now, oscillating in pitch, passengers probably screaming. Standard procedure said to try to maintain some kind of control, aim for the longest runway available, pray that you could get the nose up enough at the last second to survive the crash landing. But something in his mind, call it instinct, call it experience, call it whatever you wanted, was telling him that standard procedure wasn't going to work this time. The plane was too unstable. The oscillations were getting worse. By the time they reached Pittsburgh, they'd either stall and fall from the sky, or they'd be in such an uncontrolled descent that impact would be unsurvivable. "There's a river," Michael heard himself say. "What?" "The Allegheny River. It runs right through Pittsburgh." Michael pulled up the navigation display, zooming in on the terrain below them. "If we can't make a runway, water is better than ground. We ditch in the river." Jamie stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Mike, we're in a 737 with no hydraulic control. Ditching requires precision flap deployment, exact speed management, perfect pitch control at touchdown. We have none of that. We'll break apart on impact. We'll break apart on ground impact too. At least in water there's a chance. Look at the descent rate. We're not making Pittsburgh's runway. By the time we get there, we'll be too low, too fast, and out of control. The river gives us a shot." It wasn't in any manual. Ditching without hydraulics was considered impossible, a guaranteed fatality. The famous Hudson River landing by Captain Sullenberger had been with full control of the aircraft. This would be different, more like controlled crashing than landing. But that voice in Michael's head, the one that had kept him alive through 2 decades of flying, through thunderstorms and mechanical failures and wind shear, was absolutely certain. Don't try for the airport. The river. It has to be the river. United 482 Cleveland Center, say your intentions. Michael made the decision. Cleveland Center 482, we're unable to make Pittsburgh International. We're going to attempt a water landing on the Allegheny River. A pause on the radio. Then, 482, say again. We're ditching in the Allegheny. Notify emergency services. We'll be in the water in approximately 8 minutes. Jamie was already pulling up charts, calculating approach vectors. Whatever his doubts, he was a professional, and once the captain made a decision, you executed it. Okay. River's about a half-mile wide through downtown Pittsburgh. We need to come in aligned with the river flow, minimize crosswind. Current heading is 285. River runs roughly north-northwest. We need to turn left about 40 degrees. Do it. Use engine thrust differential. All power to the left. The senior flight attendant's voice came over the intercom. "Cockpit, we're getting questions back here. What's happening?" Michael toggled the cabin address system. His voice would now broadcast to all 147 people whose lives depended on the next 8 minutes. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Chen. We've experienced a significant mechanical failure and we're unable to land at an airport. We're going to make an emergency water landing on a river. Flight attendants, begin emergency procedures. Brace positions. Everyone follow their instructions exactly. We're going to do everything we can to get you home safely." He could imagine the terror in the cabin, but there was no time to manage it. Either they survived the next 8 minutes, or they didn't. The plane grudgingly began to turn as Jamie poured thrust into the remaining left engine. Without hydraulics to coordinate the turn, they were essentially pointing the plane with engine power alone, like trying to steer a car by revving one wheel. The oscillations continued, the nose pitching up and down sickeningly. "Mike, I hope you know what you're doing," Jamie said quietly. "So do I," Michael admitted. "So do I." 5,000 feet and dropping. Michael could see Pittsburgh spread out below them now. The 3 rivers converging, the downtown skyscrapers, the bridges. Somewhere down there, Sarah was probably at the hospital finishing her shift as an OR nurse. The girls would be at school. None of them knew that husband and father was trying to land a crippled airplane on a river. United 482, Pittsburgh approach. Emergency services are being positioned along the Allegheny. We're clearing all river traffic. Winds are 290 at 12 knots. Water temperature is 42 degrees. 42 degrees. Anyone who survived the impact had maybe 20 minutes in that water before hypothermia became fatal. Michael filed that information away. Just another problem to solve if they lived through the landing. "Jamie, talk me through what we've got." "Altitude 4,000 feet, descending at 1,800 feet per minute. Airspeed 220 knots. Too fast, but we can't deploy flaps to slow down. Engine 1 at maximum thrust giving us forward momentum, but we can't throttle back without losing what little control we have. Pitch oscillation is plus or minus 10 degrees, seems to be stabilizing slightly. Michael processed the numbers. Too fast, too unstable, barely controllable. The voice in his head, that intuitive sense developed over 10,000 hours of flight time, told him they needed to slow down somehow. But without flaps or other control surfaces, how? Landing gear, he said suddenly. What? Drop the landing gear. It'll create drag, slow us down. Jamie hesitated. Mike, landing gear down in a water landing is textbook wrong. The gear will catch the water and flip us, only if we come in nose down. If we can keep the nose up, wheels touch first and absorb initial impact before the fuselage hits. Besides, we need to slow down, or we'll disintegrate on impact regardless. It was completely against procedure. Every water-ditching protocol said to keep landing gear retracted to avoid the gear catching and causing catastrophic cartwheeling. But those protocols assumed you had control surfaces to manage your descent. Michael was working without a playbook now, just intuition and physics. Your airplane, Jamie said, giving Michael explicit control. Michael reached for the landing gear lever, a mechanical system that worked independently of hydraulics. The gear dropped, and immediately he felt the plane slow, the drag changing the flight characteristics. The nose wanted to come up, which was good. But they were also descending faster now, trading forward speed for vertical velocity. 3,000 feet, Jamie called out. River is dead ahead, about 2 miles. Through the windscreen, Michael could see the Allegheny snaking through the city. From this altitude, it looked narrow, lined with buildings and bridges. Hitting one of those bridges would be instant death for everyone on board. They needed to thread the needle between them. Calculate impact point, Michael ordered. We need to touch down between bridges, longest straight stretch of river. Jamie's fingers worked the navigation computer. Best bet is the stretch between the 9th Street Bridge and 16th Street Bridge. About 2,000 feet of clear water. But Mike, we're coming in at an angle, we're not aligned. Differential thrust, hard left. They poured power into the left engine, and the plane sluggishly turned, fighting them every inch. The oscillations were worse now, the nose pitching wildly. Through the windscreen, Michael could see the river surface, dark and cold, rushing up at them. 2,000 feet, airspeed 190 knots, rate of descent 2,000 feet per minute. Too fast. Still too fast. They'd hit the water at twice the safe landing speed. The fuselage would crumple, water would flood in, people would die, but there was nothing left to do, no more tricks to try. This was it. The cabin address system crackled, the senior flight attendant's voice, calm and professional, despite what must be absolute chaos back there. Brace, brace, brace. Heads down, stay down. Brace, brace, brace. 1,000 feet. Michael could see individual bridges now, the texture of the water, boats frantically moving out of their path. Emergency vehicles were visible along the riverbanks, tiny red and white specks waiting to see if they'd be conducting a rescue or recovering bodies. 500 feet. Jamie's voice was tight. Mike, we're not going to make it. But they had to make it. Michael thought of Sarah, their first date at a coffee shop in Berkeley when they were both students. Emma's piano recital last month, Sophie's soccer championship game, birthdays and Christmas mornings and ordinary Tuesday dinners. He couldn't let that end here. Couldn't let 147 families receive the phone call that their loved ones weren't coming home. And then he heard it. Not an actual voice, nothing external or supernatural, but a clarity in his own mind, cutting through the panic and the alarms and the screaming wind resistance. A certainty that felt like someone speaking directly into his consciousness. Pull up, now. Trust the wings. Every instinct screamed against it. Pulling up in a descent increased stall risk. Stalling this close to the ground meant death. But that voice, that certainty, was absolute. Michael pulled back on the yoke with everything he had. The plane's nose came up reluctant, fighting him. The stall warning horn blared. They were seconds from falling out of the sky, but the wings bit into the air. The descent rate slowed. 100 feet became 80, became 60, their downward velocity bleeding off as the wings provided just enough lift to cushion their approach. "Impact in 5 seconds, Jamie called out. 4, 3, 2... The landing gear hit first, precisely as Michael had hoped, wheels touching the water surface. The gear immediately collapsed, but they'd absorbed the initial shock. Then the fuselage hit, and the world exploded into violence. The impact was like hitting concrete. Michael's body slammed forward against his harness, head snapping back, teeth cracking together. The windscreen shattered as water pressure crushed the nose cone. The cabin filled with the screaming sound of aluminum tearing, rivets popping, metal grinding against itself as the plane skipped across the water like a stone. They were skidding sideways now, the current catching them, the fuselage starting to rotate. Michael fought the controls uselessly, but there was nothing to control anymore, just a broken tube of metal sliding across the river, shedding pieces of itself as it went. The left wing caught something, a piling, a piece of debris, and the plane spun, throwing them against their restraints again. Then they were still, or relatively still, the cabin tilting at a sickening angle, water pouring in through 100 breaches in the fuselage. For a moment, Michael just sat, stunned, ears ringing, vision blurred. Then training reasserted itself. "Jamie, you okay?" Yeah, I think so." "We're floating?" They were. Barely. The fuselage had broken into sections, but was still mostly intact, and the trapped air was keeping them buoyant, for now. Michael toggled the cabin address system, praying it still worked. "Evacuate. Evacuate. This is not a drill. Flight attendants. Initiate evacuation." He pulled off his headset, released his harness, and staggered back to open the cockpit door. The cabin was chaos. Passengers screaming, kids crying, water already knee-deep in the forward section. But the flight attendants were doing their jobs, getting people out of their seats, directing them toward the emergency exits. The overwing exits were open, inflatable slides deployed. Michael could see passengers jumping into the freezing river water, others crowding into the emergency rafts. Emergency personnel in boats were already approaching from both riverbanks. "Everyone out!" Michael shouted. "Move to the exits! Help each other! Go, go, go!" He and Jamie moved through the cabin, checking under seats, in the bathrooms, in the overhead bins, anywhere someone might be trapped or unconscious. The water was rising fast, the fuselage settling deeper as air escaped and water filled compartments. An elderly woman was trapped by a collapsed overhead bin. Michael and Jamie lifted it, freed her, passed her to a flight attendant who got her to an exit. A child, maybe 7 years old, was frozen in his seat, catatonic with fear. Jamie scooped him up and carried him to the door, handed him to the first responder in the boat outside. The water was chest-high now, shockingly cold. Michael's legs were going numb. "Last check!" he called out. "Everyone accounted for?" The senior flight attendant, Maria, her uniform torn and face bleeding from a gash on her forehead, confirmed, "All passengers out, crew out, just you two left." "Get out," Michael ordered her. "Now!" She went, and Michael did one more sweep of the submerging cabin, Jamie beside him. Empty seats, abandoned luggage, personal items floating in the murky water, but no people. Thank God, no people. "Let's go," Jamie said, teeth chattering. "Before this thing goes under completely." They waded to the exit, the water up to their necks now. Outside, a Coast Guard rescue boat was waiting. Strong hands pulled them out of the freezing water, wrapped them in thermal blankets, asked if they were injured. Michael looked back at Flight 482. The broken fuselage was settling into the river, the tail section already submerged, water pouring into the broken windows. In a few minutes, it would be completely underwater. But floating around it, in rafts and boats and clinging to debris, were 147 people. Some injured, all traumatized, but alive, all of them alive. "Did we—" Michael's voice was shaking from cold or shock or both. "Did everyone make it?" The Coast Guard rescue swimmer nodded, grinning. "All accounted for, Captain. Every single soul. You just pulled off a goddamn miracle. Michael closed his eyes, let the relief wash over him. He'd heard the voice, that impossible certainty telling him to pull up at the last second. He'd trusted it, and somehow, impossibly, they'd survived. The hospital was chaos. 147 passengers and crew, all needing medical evaluation, many with injuries from the impact. Michael had 3 cracked ribs, a concussion, and severe hypothermia. Jamie had a broken wrist and lacerations. Miraculously, most passengers had escaped with minor injuries, bruises, sprains, cuts. 7 were serious enough to require immediate surgery, but everyone was alive. Sarah found him in the emergency room, still wrapped in warming blankets, an IV in his arm replenishing fluids. She ran to him, tears streaming down her face, and he held her as best he could with his damaged ribs, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. When I heard there was a plane down, I thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm okay," he murmured. "I'm here. Everyone's here." Emma and Sophie arrived an hour later, brought by Sarah's sister. His daughters, usually so independent and teenage cool, clung to him like they were little girls again. Michael held them and let them cry, and maybe cried a little himself, because he'd come so close to never seeing them again. The hospital room filled with people, airline executives, FAA investigators, reporters kept at bay by hospital security. Michael's phone, once it was recovered and dried out, had hundreds of messages and missed calls. Flight 482 was already international news. "Miracle on the Allegheny," the headlines read. "Captain's split-second decision saves 147 lives." But Michael didn't feel like a hero. He felt exhausted and confused, and haunted by the memory of that voice in his head telling him to pull up. What if he hadn't listened? What if he'd followed standard procedure instead? Would they all be dead? The FAA investigator, a severe woman named Patricia Rawlings, arrived the next morning. Michael was being kept for observation, and she set up in his hospital room with recording equipment and a stack of forms. "Captain Chen, I need to walk through your decision-making process during the emergency, starting from the initial mechanical failure. Talk me through every choice you made." Michael recounted it all. The engine failure, the hydraulic loss, the decision to ditch in the river instead of attempting Pittsburgh International, the landing gear deployment, that final pull-up that had slowed their descent just enough to survive impact. Rawlings listened without comment until he finished. Then, "Captain, you violated several established protocols. Ditching with landing gear down is explicitly advised against. Pulling up during final approach of an emergency landing risks catastrophic stall. By all engineering analyses, your choices should have resulted in total loss of the aircraft and everyone on board." "But they didn't," Michael said quietly. "No, they didn't. Which is why we're trying to understand what happened. Walk me through your reasoning for the landing gear deployment." Michael tried to articulate what had been pure instinct in the moment. "We were coming in too fast. Without flaps or other control surfaces, I needed drag to slow us down. The gear created that drag. Yes, there was risk of catching the water, but I calculated that risk was less than the certainty of breaking apart from excessive speed on impact. And the pull-up? The stall warning was active. You were seconds from losing all lift." How could he explain the voice? The certainty that had overridden every bit of training. The descent rate was still too high. Even with the gear down, we were going to hit too hard. I needed to trade forward speed for lift, just for a few seconds, to cushion the impact. I trusted that the wings would hold, that we'd maintain just enough airspeed to avoid stalling until we touched down. You trusted, based on what analysis? Based on... Michael paused. Based on a voice in his head? That would get him grounded for psychological evaluation. Based on 23 years of flying experience. Feel for the aircraft. Understanding of aerodynamics. In the moment, I made the best judgment I could with the information available. Rawlings made notes. "Captain, I'm going to be honest with you. Preliminary analysis suggests you got incredibly lucky. The specific conditions, wind speed and direction, the plane's descent angle, the flex characteristics of those particular wings, all came together in a way that defied statistical probability. If any variable had been slightly different, the outcome would have been catastrophic. I understand that. Do you? Because right now you're being hailed as a hero. But from a regulatory standpoint, we need to determine if your decisions were sound piloting or reckless risk-taking that happened to work out. Those are very different things. After Rawlings left, Michael lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling. She was right, of course. He'd made decisions that violated his training, that went against every protocol, and somehow it had worked. But why? What had given him that certainty, that voice telling him what to do? Over the next days, as he recovered physically, Michael was visited by dozens of passengers from Flight 482. A businessman who'd been heading to Chicago for a conference, now crying and thanking Michael for getting him home to his wife. A college student who'd been scared of flying and now was even more scared, but also strangely grateful to be alive. A young mother traveling with her 8-month-old baby, both uninjured, the mother repeatedly saying, "You saved my baby, you saved my baby." Each one reinforced the reality, 147 lives that would have ended if he'd made different choices, but also 147 lives that could have ended if his unorthodox choices had gone wrong. The co-pilot, Jamie Rodriguez, visited on the third day. He'd been discharged after surgery on his wrist, and he looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. "How you holding up?" Michael asked. "Not sleeping much," Jamie admitted. "Keep replaying it. Keep thinking about how close we came." He sat in the visitor's chair. "Mike, I need to ask you something. That pull-up at the end, what made you do it? Because from where I was sitting, it looked like suicide. We were already on the edge of stalling." Michael chose his words carefully. "I can't explain it rationally. In that moment I just knew. Pull up, trust the wings. It was the right call." "You heard something," Jamie said. It wasn't a question. "What do you mean?" "In the cockpit, right before you pulled up. You had this look, like you were listening to something. I thought maybe there was radio traffic I wasn't hearing, but I checked the transcripts. There was nothing. So, what were you listening to?" Michael met his co-pilot's eyes. Intuition, maybe. Or experience. Or just desperation making me hear what I wanted to hear, which was a voice telling me what to do. Jamie nodded slowly. "My grandmother was deeply religious. Catholic, went to Mass every day. She used to talk about the voice of God, how it came in moments of crisis. Not actual words, but certainty, knowing." He paused. "I'm not particularly religious myself, but Mike, I was in that cockpit. I saw what happened, and I don't think aerodynamics alone explains why we're alive." After Jamie left, Michael thought about faith. He'd been raised vaguely Presbyterian, but hadn't attended church in decades. Sarah was agnostic, the girls unbaptized. He believed in science, in training, in human capability, not in divine intervention or miracles. But he couldn't deny the experience. That voice, that certainty, had been real. Whether it came from his subconscious, from years of accumulated flight experience coalescing into intuition, or from something external, he didn't know. Did it matter? The result was the same. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Dad, there's a reporter outside the house. Mom made me and Sophie go out the back way to get to school. This is crazy." The media attention was intensifying. Michael's face was on every news channel, his background being dissected, his decision-making analyzed by aviation experts who hadn't been in that cockpit, feeling the plane shudder apart, hearing the alarms, knowing that 147 lives depended on the next 10 seconds. Some experts praised his unorthodox thinking. Others criticized his protocol violations. The airline was being cautious, neither condemning nor celebrating, until the FAA investigation concluded. Michael was on paid leave, standard for any major incident, with no clear timeline for when or if he'd fly again. He wasn't sure he wanted to, because every time he closed his eyes, he was back in that cockpit, hearing the voice, making the choice that should have killed everyone, but somehow hadn't. And he didn't know if he could trust himself to make the right choice again. The full NTSB investigation took 3 months. Michael was interviewed 7 times, each session probing deeper into his mental state, his decision-making process, his background and training. The wreckage of Flight 482 was recovered from the Allegheny River and transported to a hangar where investigators painstakingly reconstructed the aircraft. The findings were startling. The initial engine failure had been caused by a catastrophic fan blade failure, a metallurgy defect that caused a blade to separate at high RPM, destroying the engine and sending shrapnel through the wing. That shrapnel had severed all 3 hydraulic lines, a 1 in a million confluence of trajectories. The manufacturer issued an immediate recall of similar engine models on 737s worldwide. "You couldn't have prevented it," the lead investigator told Michael during their final interview. "Random mechanical failure, no warning, no way for the flight crew to anticipate it. What happened next? Your response. That's what saved everyone." The official report praised Michael's innovative thinking under extreme pressure, while noting that his decisions deviated from standard emergency protocols in ways that could have been catastrophic under different conditions. The language was carefully neutral, neither fully endorsing nor condemning his choices. The FAA cleared him to return to flight duty after completing additional simulator training focused on hydraulic failures and emergency landings. But the airline was more cautious. His supervisor, a career pilot named Tom Davidson, called him in for a meeting. "Mike, you're a damn good pilot, one of the best I've worked with, but you've got to understand the position you've put us in. Every pilot in our fleet is now questioning whether they should follow protocol or trust their gut if something goes wrong. You've created a precedent that could be dangerous." "I did what I had to do to save my passengers," Michael said, "and it worked, this time. But we can't train pilots to violate protocol. We can't tell them to ignore their instruments and listen to voices in their heads. That's not aviation. That's chaos." "So what are you saying?" Tom sighed. "I'm saying, take the leave. Take a few more months. Do the psychological evaluation the union requires. Come back when you're ready. But Mike, when you come back, you need to be a by-the-book pilot. Because next time, the voice might be wrong." Michael took the leave. He spent his days at home, ostensibly recovering, but really just existing in a strange limbo. Sarah went back to work at the hospital. The girls returned to their normal teenage lives, though he noticed they hugged him more often, held on a little longer. He started seeing a therapist, mandatory for the airline, but actually helpful. Dr. Jennifer Walsh specialized in trauma and high-stress professions, and she didn't dismiss his experience of the voice. In crisis situations, the brain can access information in ways we don't fully understand, she explained during one session. Pattern recognition that happens too fast for conscious thought. Years of training and experience synthesizing into what feels like external guidance. Some people experience it as visual, seeing the right solution. Others hear it as voice. The mechanism varies, but the source is the same. Your own expertise, accessed through non-conscious pathways. So, I was talking to myself? In a sense, the most experienced, knowledgeable version of yourself, the part that had absorbed 23 years of flight lessons and was able to calculate probabilities and solutions faster than your conscious mind could articulate them. It made sense. It was the rational explanation, but it didn't feel complete, because that voice hadn't felt like him. It had felt like something other, something certain and calm and utterly confident when he had been anything but. 4 months after the crash, Michael was invited to speak at a commercial aviation safety conference. 2,000 pilots, air traffic controllers, and aviation professionals gathered to hear him describe Flight 482. He stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, people who understood what he'd experienced, who'd faced their own emergencies in the sky. "I'm not going to tell you that I made perfect choices that day," Michael began. "The NTSB report makes that clear. What I will tell you is that in the moment, with incomplete information and no time for deliberation, I made the best choices I could. I drew on training, experience, and yes, intuition. He paused, deciding how much to share. Many of you have experienced something similar, that moment when you just know what to do, even if it doesn't match the manual. Some call it pilot instinct, others call it experience. I don't know what to call it, but I trusted it, and 147 people went home to their families. After the speech, dozens of pilots approached him. Many shared their own stories, moments when they deviated from protocol based on intuition, times when the right choice hadn't been the book choice. A retired captain, a man in his 70s, pulled Michael aside. I was flying 727s back in the 80s, had a similar experience, total hydraulic failure over the Atlantic. No good options, just less bad ones. And I heard it too. That voice, that certainty, did what it told me. Landed with no hydraulics at Shannon Airport in Ireland. 72 people walked away. Did you ever figure out what it was? Michael asked. The voice? The old captain smiled. Spent 30 years wondering. Talked to priests, psychologists, other pilots. My conclusion, does it matter? Call it God, call it intuition, call it the collective wisdom of every pilot who ever lived speaking through your subconscious. The label doesn't change the result. You trusted it, everyone lived. That's what counts. Michael returned to flying 6 months after the crash. His first flight back was Boston to Chicago, the same route as Flight 482, and he'd requested it specifically. The airline had offered him different routes, desk work if he preferred, but he knew he needed to do this. The crew assembled in the briefing room beforehand. His co-pilot for this flight was a young woman named Lisa Park, newly promoted to first officer. She looked nervous. Captain Chen, I wanted to say, what you did was incredible. I've studied the Flight 482 incident in every training scenario. You're kind of a legend. I'm just a pilot, Michael said. Like you, like everyone here. The situation was extraordinary. I did my best. But as he walked through pre-flight checks, scanning instruments and systems with practiced efficiency, Michael felt different. More aware of every sound, every indicator, every subtle shift in the aircraft's behavior. The crash hadn't made him fearless. It had made him hyper-vigilant, attuned to danger. The flight went perfectly. No mechanical issues, no emergencies, just a routine commercial flight with 147 passengers, the same number as that day. Michael noted the coincidence and chose not to read anything into it. After landing in Chicago, as passengers deplaned, an elderly man approached the cockpit. Captain Chen, I was on Flight 482, seat 17A. I just wanted to thank you again, and to say that I'm glad you're still flying. The world needs pilots like you. Michael shook his hand, humbled and uncertain how to respond. How do you accept gratitude for doing something you barely understood yourself? 1 year after the crash, the airline organized a reunion for Flight 482 survivors. It was held at a hotel in Pittsburgh, near the river where they'd ditched. Of the 147 people on board that day, 118 came to the reunion, some traveling from across the country. Michael attended with Sarah and the girls. As they entered the ballroom, he was overwhelmed by the sight of all these people, alive, healthy, gathered to commemorate the day they'd almost died. Many he recognized from his memory of the crash or from hospital visits afterward. Others were strangers, faces he'd never consciously seen, but whose lives were permanently connected to his. The atmosphere was strange. Part celebration, part memorial, part group therapy session. People hugged and cried and shared their stories of the crash and the year since. One woman had gotten married. Her fiancé had proposed the day after, saying he'd almost lost her and wasn't waiting any longer. A man had quit his high-stress corporate job to become a teacher, the near-death experience reshuffling his priorities. Several people had started therapy, struggled with PTSD, found support groups for trauma survivors. Jamie Rodriguez was there with his family, wife, and 3 young kids. He and Michael embraced, no words needed for what they'd shared in that cockpit. The event organizer, a woman from the airline's PR department, asked Michael to say a few words. He stood at the microphone, looking out at the assembled survivors, and felt the weight of it all, these lives, this moment, this impossible survival. "I don't have a speech prepared," he began. "I don't think there are adequate words for what we went through, or what it means that we're all here today. I can tell you what I remember from the cockpit. The alarms, the controls failing, the decision to ditch in the river. But what I can't tell you is why it worked. Why we survived when statistically we shouldn't have." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've spent a year analyzing that day. The NTSB spent months doing the same. We can explain the mechanical failure, the trajectory, the impact dynamics. What we can't explain is the series of decisions and circumstances that aligned perfectly to save everyone. The wind direction that steadied our approach. The river current that oriented the fuselage. My decision to pull up at the last second. A decision I can't fully justify but knew was right." Emma, sitting in the front row with Sophie and Sarah, was crying. His daughter, who was usually so composed, so pragmatic, was openly weeping. Michael realized many people in the room were crying. "Some people have called it a miracle," he continued. "I'm not a religious man, so I don't know if that's the right word, but I do know that something happened that day beyond mechanical explanations. Whether you attribute it to God, fate, chance, or the accumulated skill of every pilot who taught me to fly, something guided us through, and I'm grateful for it. Grateful that you're all here. Grateful that I'm here. Grateful for another day with my family and for all of you having another day with yours." The applause was thunderous. People stood, and Michael realized they were giving him a standing ovation. He felt embarrassed and humbled and overwhelmed all at once. Afterward, dozens of people approached to thank him, to share their stories, to give him cards and gifts their children had made. A little boy, maybe 9 years old, presented him with a crayon drawing of an airplane and a river. "You saved my mom," the boy said solemnly. "Thank you." Michael knelt to the child's level. "You're welcome. What's your name?" "Connor." "Connor, your mom is very brave. You should be proud of her. She stayed calm when things were scary, and she helped other people even when she was scared herself. That's real courage." The mother, standing behind Connor, mouthed, "Thank you," as tears streamed down her face. That evening, after the formal reunion ended, a smaller group gathered at a bar overlooking the river. Maybe 30 people, crew members, a few passengers, their families. They talked and laughed and told stories, the conversation flowing easily among people who'd shared something profound. A passenger named Marcus Williams, who'd been in seat 12B, raised his beer glass. "I want to propose a toast to Captain Chen and First Officer Rodriguez, to the flight attendants who got everyone out safely, to the emergency responders who pulled us from the water, and to all of us for surviving and thriving and being here to tell the story." "Hear, hear," echoed around the table. Later, Michael stepped outside onto the balcony, needing a moment alone. The Allegheny River flowed below, dark and peaceful. It was hard to believe that a year ago a broken airplane had plunged into that water, that 147 people had been thrown into freezing current, that they'd all somehow survived. Sarah joined him, slipping her hand into his. "How are you feeling?" "Grateful. Confused. Still processing, I think. The therapist said that might take years." "Yeah." Michael watched the river flow. "Sarah, can I tell you something? Something I haven't fully articulated to anyone?" "Of course. That voice I heard, the one telling me to pull up. I've tried to rationalize it as intuition, as subconscious processing of flight data. But it didn't feel like me. It felt like guidance. Like someone who knew exactly what I needed to do was telling me." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Do you think it was God?" "I don't know. I don't know what I believe about God. But I believe something helped us that day. Whether divine or biological or some phenomenon we don't have names for yet. Something beyond just luck. Does it bother you?" "Not knowing," Michael considered. "It used to. I wanted a rational explanation. wanted everything to make sense within the framework of physics and aerodynamics. But now, I think I'm okay with mystery, with not knowing. Some things are bigger than our ability to understand them. Emma and Sophie appeared in the doorway. "Dad, they're taking a group photo. They want you in it." Inside, the survivors assembled for a photograph. This group of 118 people who'd faced death together and come through to the other side. Michael stood in the center, Jamie beside him, crew members and passengers arranged around them. The photographer counted down, the flash went off, and the moment was captured. 118 smiling faces, 118 lives saved, 118 stories still being written. 2 years after Flight 482, Michael was still flying for the airline. He'd been promoted to check airman, responsible for training and evaluating other pilots. The irony wasn't lost on him. The pilot who'd violated protocols to save his passengers was now teaching others to follow those same protocols. But his approach to training had changed. During simulator sessions, he'd introduced the hydraulic failure scenario that mirrored Flight 482. Most pilots went by the book: try for the nearest airport, follow checklist procedures, hope for the best. Michael would then ask, "What else could you do? If the book isn't working, what's your backup?" It made some administrators uncomfortable, this encouragement to think beyond procedures, but Michael had earned enough credibility that they gave him latitude. Besides, the statistics didn't lie. Pilots who trained with him were measurably better at handling unexpected emergencies. Emma was in college now, studying engineering with a focus on aerospace. She'd been directly inspired by the crash, by seeing her father's aircraft broken apart and understanding both the fragility and resilience of human flight. Sophie was a high school junior, volunteering with emergency services, drawn to the idea of helping people in crisis. Sarah had started speaking at hospital conferences about trauma and family support, drawing on her experience of the year after Michael's crash. They'd grown closer through the ordeal, the near loss reminding them what mattered. Michael had maintained contact with many Flight 482 survivors. A few had become genuine friends. Jamie, of course, but also Marcus Williams and a woman named Jennifer Kim, who'd been traveling with her daughter. They formed an informal support group, meeting quarterly to check in and share how they were processing the ongoing effects of shared trauma. "It's been 2 years, and I still can't fly without anxiety medication," Jennifer admitted during one gathering. "Every time there's turbulence, every time I hear an unusual sound, I'm back in that cabin, water pouring in, thinking I'm going to die." "That's normal," Michael assured her. "PTSD from traumatic events doesn't follow a timeline. Be patient with yourself." "But you fly every day. How do you do it?" Michael thought about the question. "Honestly, I don't know if I'm managing it or just compartmentalizing. Every flight, I'm hyper-aware of every system, every sound. I run through emergency scenarios in my head constantly. My therapist says it's hypervigilance, a trauma response, but it also makes me a better pilot." The FAA had implemented new procedures based on Flight 482's investigation. Engine fan blades were now subject to more frequent inspections. Hydraulic line routing was redesigned on certain aircraft to prevent single-point failures. Pilot training included more scenarios for complete system failures. Michael had contributed to these updates, providing input from the cockpit perspective. He'd also been interviewed for a documentary about the crash. The filmmakers had spent a year putting it together, interviewing survivors, investigators, aviation experts, reconstructing the event with CGI animations. Michael watched the finished film at a private screening and was struck by seeing the event from outside his own experience. Hearing passengers describe their terror, seeing the rescue efforts from the riverbank perspective, understanding the full scope of what had happened, while he'd been focused only on keeping the plane airborne. The documentary ended with Michael speaking directly to camera. "I'm often asked if I consider Flight 482 a miracle. My answer is that I consider it a reminder of human capability, of what we can accomplish when training, instinct, and determination align, but also a reminder of how fragile we are, how quickly things can go wrong, and how much we depend on each other. Every person on that plane survived because everyone did their part. The flight crew, the passengers who helped each other evacuate, the first responders who pulled people from freezing water. That's not a miracle. That's humanity at its best. Indeed, 3 years after the crash, Michael was approached by an aerospace engineering professor from MIT who was studying the aerodynamics of Flight 482's final descent. Dr. Robert Lang had run extensive computer simulations trying to recreate the conditions of the landing. "Captain Chen, I need to show you something," Lang said during their meeting at his office. He pulled up simulation results on a large monitor. "I've run this scenario 800 times, varying wind conditions, descent angles, the timing of your control inputs. In 763 of those simulations, the aircraft breaks apart on impact or flips during the water landing. Everyone dies." Michael stared at the numbers. "And the other 37 simulations? Survivable landings. But here's what's remarkable. The successful outcomes require perfect timing on your pull-up maneuver. Too early, you stall and fall. Too late, you hit too hard. The window for success is approximately 1.4 seconds. You executed it within that window. So I got lucky? Maybe. Or maybe your brain was processing information and making calculations faster than conscious thought. The angle of descent, the wind shear, the flex characteristics of the wings under stress. Somehow you integrated all of that and made the right choice at exactly the right moment." Lang paused. "Captain, I'm a scientist. I don't believe in supernatural intervention. But I also can't explain, from a purely probabilistic standpoint, how you threaded that needle. The margin for success was too narrow." After leaving MIT, Michael drove home thinking about those 763 simulations where everyone died versus the 37 where they lived. The razor-thin margin between catastrophe and survival. That voice in his head telling him when to pull up, had it been his subconscious calculating those aerodynamics in real time, or something else? He'd stopped trying to definitively answer that question. Some mysteries were meant to remain mysterious. What mattered was the outcome. 147 lives saved, 147 families still whole, 147 futures still unfolding. That evening, Michael sat in his backyard with Sarah, watching the sunset. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Williams. "Hey, Captain, wanted you to know my wife and I are expecting a baby, due in March. Going to name him Michael, if it's a boy. Hope that's okay." Michael smiled and showed Sarah the text. Another life that wouldn't exist without that day. "How many now?" Sarah asked. "How many babies born to Flight 482 survivors?" 11, I think. Plus 2 adoptions, 3 weddings, countless other life decisions that only happened because people survived to make them. Michael shook his head in wonder. The ripple effects are endless. Sophie came outside, heading to her car for her emergency services volunteer shift. She kissed her father's cheek as she passed. "Love you, Dad. Love you too, Soph. Be safe." After she drove away, Sarah said, "You know what I think about sometimes? All the things that would never have happened if that plane had crashed. All the people our daughters will meet and influence and maybe love. All the patients I'll treat as a nurse. All the pilots you'll train. The cascade of effects from one moment, one decision. The butterfly effect," Michael said. "More than that. It's about how interconnected everything is. How one person's choice can resonate through hundreds of lives." She took his hand. "You made the right choice, Michael. Not the book choice, not the safe choice, but the right choice." Michael squeezed her hand, grateful for her certainty, even when his own remained complicated by doubt and wonder. 5 years after Flight 482, Michael received an invitation that surprised him. The Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum wanted to create an exhibit about the crash, featuring recovered pieces of the aircraft and telling the story of the miracle on the Allegheny. He flew to Washington, D.C. for the exhibit opening. Walking through the display was surreal. Seeing the damaged flight recorder, the captain's yoke he'd gripped during those final seconds, photographs of the wreckage being pulled from the river, and video interviews with survivors sharing their stories. The centerpiece was a detailed timeline of the final 8 minutes, narrated by Michael's voice from interviews. Visitors could follow the sequence of decisions, see how each choice had narrowed or expanded the possibility of survival, understand the razor-thin margins between catastrophe and miracle. At the end of the exhibit was a simple question on the wall. What guided Captain Chen's final decision to pull up? Was it training, intuition, or something beyond explanation? Below the question was a comment board where visitors could share their thoughts. Michael read through dozens of responses. God's hand was on that plane. Years of experience synthesized into split-second judgment. Sometimes we access knowledge we don't know we have. The collective wisdom of every pilot who ever flew. Maybe we'll never know, and that's okay. Michael added his own comment, writing with a provided marker, "I heard a voice that day. Where it came from, I still don't know. But I'm grateful I listened." Captain Michael Chen. During the public reception, Michael was approached by a young man, maybe 25, who looked vaguely familiar. "Captain Chen, I'm Connor Williams. I was 7 years old on Flight 482, seat 12B with my mother." Michael remembered. The little boy who'd been so brave during evacuation, who'd helped his mother into the life raft. "Connor, look at you all grown up." "I'm a pilot now," Connor said, smiling. "Got my commercial license last year, working as a first officer for a regional carrier, because of you, because you showed me what a pilot could be." Michael felt emotion welling up. That's incredible, Connor. I wanted to thank you, not just for saving my life that day, but for inspiring me to do this, to be the person in the cockpit who makes the right choice when it matters. They talked for 20 minutes, pilot to pilot, Connor asking questions about decision-making and emergency procedures, and how to trust your instincts while respecting your training. Michael answered as best he could, sharing the hard-earned wisdom of 28 years of flying. "The voice you heard," Connor asked finally. "Do you ever hear it anymore? In other situations?" "Sometimes," Michael admitted, "not as clearly, not as urgently, but occasionally, in the cockpit or even just in life, I'll have a moment of certainty about what to do. I've learned to recognize it, to trust it, while also verifying it against training and logic. It's not about abandoning procedure. It's about knowing when procedure isn't enough." That night, back in his hotel room, Michael called Sarah. "You won't believe who I met today. Connor Williams, the 7-year-old from seat 12B. He's a pilot now." "Because of you," Sarah said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "Because he survived. I was just the instrument." "Mike, you've spent 5 years minimizing what you did. Maybe it's time to accept it. You saved 147 people. That matters. Your choice mattered." After they hung up, Michael stood at the hotel window looking out over Washington, D.C., the monuments lit against the night sky. He thought about all the lives touched by that day, not just the 147 on the plane, but their families, their children born afterward, people like Connor who'd been inspired to become pilots themselves. The ripple effects spreading outward through time, touching thousands of lives in ways he'd never fully know, and he thought about the voice. That moment of absolute certainty when everything else was chaos. He still didn't know what it was. Divine intervention, subconscious expertise, some phenomenon science hadn't yet explained, but he'd stopped needing to know. Some questions didn't have answers. Some mysteries were meant to be lived rather than solved. What mattered wasn't understanding the source of guidance, but being open to receiving it and brave enough to follow it. Michael's phone buzzed with messages from Flight 482 survivors who'd seen news coverage of the Smithsonian exhibit. Photographs of families, babies, weddings, graduations, life continuing, flowering, expanding because of that impossible day when a broken airplane had hit a river and everyone had walked away. He saved every message, every photograph, these tangible reminders of what was possible when training and courage and something beyond explanation all aligned. 10 years after Flight 482, Michael was scheduled to retire. His final flight was, at his request, Boston to Chicago, full circle from where it had begun. The airline made it a celebration flight, with several Flight 482 survivors purchasing tickets specifically to be there. As Michael walked through pre-flight checks with his co-pilot, he felt the weight of 3 decades of flying, tens of thousands of flights, hundreds of thousands of passengers. All the routine flights that had gone perfectly because of training and procedure, and that one flight where procedure hadn't been enough and something else had guided him through. The cabin crew for this final flight included Maria Gonzalez, who'd been the senior flight attendant on Flight 482 and had just announced her own retirement. They embraced in the jetway. "End of an era, Captain," Maria said, "for both of us. You saved as many lives as I did that day, Maria. Getting everyone out of that cabin when it was filling with water, that was heroic. We did it together, all of us." The flight was perfect. Smooth air, clear skies, no mechanical issues. As they began their descent into Chicago, Michael keyed the cabin address system for his final announcement as a commercial pilot. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Chen. In a few minutes we'll be landing in Chicago, completing not just this flight but my 30-year career with this airline. Flying has been the privilege of my life. The opportunity to transport people safely to their destinations, to be trusted with precious cargo of human lives. Many of you on this flight are here because you were passengers on Flight 482 10 years ago. You know that flying isn't always routine, that sometimes things go wrong, and that when they do, the outcome depends on everyone working together. Thank you for trusting me to bring you home today, and thank you for being part of my final flight." To the landing was textbook perfect. As the plane taxied to the gate, Michael could see the traditional water cannons salute, fire trucks spraying arcs of water over the aircraft, the customary honor for a retiring pilot's final flight. At the gate, Michael stood in the cockpit doorway as passengers deplaned, shaking hands and receiving hugs and well wishes. Many were crying. So was he. Connor Williams was the last to deplane. The young pilot, now flying for the same airline, had taken vacation time to be on this flight. "Thank you, Captain, for everything. Keep them safe, Connor. That's the job. Keep them safe." "I will. I promise." The terminal was filled with people. Airline staff, pilots Michael had trained, Flight 482 survivors who'd come to the airport just to be there. A banner read, "Thank you, Captain Chen. 30 years of service." Emma and Sophie were there with Sarah, his daughters, now young women, Emma working for Boeing as an aerospace engineer, Sophie in medical school studying emergency medicine. His family, shaped by that day 10 years ago when they'd almost lost him. The airline CEO gave a speech about Michael's career, the lives saved, the legacy of excellence. But Michael barely heard it. He was looking at the faces in the crowd. So many people whose lives had intersected with his, whose journeys he'd been trusted to guide. When it was his turn to speak, Michael kept it brief. "I became a pilot because I loved flying. I stayed a pilot because I loved the responsibility, the sacred trust of taking someone's husband or wife or parent or child from point A to point B safely. Most days, that's exactly what I did. One day, it was more complicated. I'm grateful for all of it, the routine flights and the impossible one, the training that prepared me and the moment when training wasn't enough, the voice that guided me and the courage to listen to it. Thank you all for being part of this journey." Later, at a restaurant near the airport, the Flight 482 survivors who'd attended threw an impromptu retirement party. Stories were shared, toasts were made, tears and laughter mingled freely. Jamie Rodriguez, now a captain himself, raised his glass. "To Mike Chen, the pilot who taught me that sometimes the right choice isn't in the manual, who showed me that courage means trusting yourself when everything says you're wrong, who saved my life and taught me how to save others." "Hear, hear!" Marcus Williams added his own toast. "To the voice in the cockpit, wherever it came from, whatever it was. To the guidance that saved 147 lives and created ripples we're still feeling 10 years later. Michael looked around the table at these people, his extended family forged in crisis and survival. "I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened that day," he said. "Why the voice came, why I listened, why it worked. But I've made peace with not knowing. Some things are bigger than understanding. They just are." That night, lying in a Chicago hotel room with Sarah beside him, Michael reflected on his 30 years of flying. 30 years of trusting instruments and procedures and his own judgment. 30 years of bringing people home safely. And one day, when all of that hadn't been enough, when he'd needed something more, the voice had been real, the guidance had been real, the survival had been real. Everything else, the source, the mechanism, the explanation, was secondary to those facts. Michael closed his eyes and, for the first time in years, consciously tried to hear it again. The voice, the certainty, the guidance that had saved everyone. There was nothing, just silence and the ambient noise of the hotel. But that was okay, because maybe he didn't need it anymore. Maybe the voice came only when necessary, in moments of true crisis, when ordinary human capability wasn't sufficient. The rest of the time, you had to trust your training, your judgment, your preparation. The voice had taught him that. In saving 147 lives, it had also taught him about the limits of human control, about humility in the face of forces beyond understanding, about being open to guidance, even when you didn't know its source. Michael drifted off to sleep, grateful for 30 years of safe flights, for one impossible landing that had changed everything, for the voice in the cockpit that had known what he needed to do, and for finally having the wisdom to accept mystery without needing to solve it. Outside the hotel window, planes continued their eternal ballet, taking off, landing, carrying precious cargo of human lives through the sky. And in every cockpit, a pilot sat trusting instruments and training and judgment, while remaining open to the possibility that sometimes, in the most crucial moments, guidance comes from places we can't explain, but must trust anyway. The voice in the cockpit, the certainty in chaos, the impossible becoming possible. 147 lives saved. And Michael Chen, retired pilot, finally at peace with the mystery of it all.